All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for those who are jumping on. We're going to dive in, and I know some people might join a little after 10 and they can sort of jump in as they get here. But for those of you who are here, welcome. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. This webinar is how counties are using federal housing vouchers to prevent homelessness among former foster youth in California. We've got a lot of exciting content for you this morning, so we're going to dive right in. So we'll do a little welcome and intro. Well, I'm doing the welcome now. We'll do some introductions, and I'll provide a brief background on the Foster Youth to Independence Initiative and Family Unification Program. Talk a little bit about a community of practice that we held over the last year, focused on FYI and FUP. And then we'll dive into best practices and policies for both county child welfare agencies and public housing authorities. And then we'll do a brief slide on resources and upcoming events, and we'll go to questions. If you'd like to put if you put your information in the chat, people won't see it because it is coming to hosts and panelists only. So that's a good reminder. If you are in the chat, that is only coming to hosts and panelists. So don't expect a response from the rest of the people on the webinar. But if you do want to submit a question, it would be best if you submit through the questions box in Zoom. It's a little bit easier for us to sort those that way. If it comes in through the chat, we'll try to catch it. But if you can, please enter any questions into the questions box, and we will address them at the end of the webinar. So as you probably know, today we are releasing a publication on best practices for local administration of federal housing vouchers through FYI and FUP for former foster youth in California. And I'm going to put the link that's on the screen in the chat so that if you want to download the document, you can. You can do that now or after the webinar. And I'll also be sending out today's slides and a recording of this web seminar later this afternoon to everyone who registered. So now I'm excited to introduce our panelists. We have four people joining that are going to talk a little bit about what some of these practices look like in real life, not just theoretically. And so I'm happy to welcome Maria Avdalas. She is the program. Oh, and someone just let me know that the chat is allowing people to post to everyone. Fantastic. Okay, so people will see that. Thank you for the clarification. We're joined by Maria Avdalas, she is the Program Integrity Analyst for the Housing Choice Voucher Program at Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency. That is Sacramento's Public Housing Authority. We have Samantha Guzowski, who is the Director of Supportive Housing and Services at Marin Housing Authority. And then we have two individuals from County Child Welfare Agency. So we have Felice McLennan, who's the Senior Analyst at County of Marin Children and Family Services, and Stephanie Sandmeyer, Human Services Program Planner with Sacramento County Department of Child, Family, and Adult Services. So we have two individuals from housing authorities, two individuals from County Child Welfare in Sacramento and Marin. So a brief background, the federal government has been administering vouchers for former foster youth for some time, but only recently did they sort of expand that program and really innovate it. So the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, currently administers two housing choice voucher programs for youth exiting foster care or who have already exited. Family Unification Program has been around since the 90s. It really was based initially really targeting families who are involved with child welfare. And it was expanded to include transition-age former foster youth. So that's been around a long time. And then in recent years, launched in 2019, was the Foster Youth to Independence Initiative FYI vouchers. And those specifically serve transition-age former foster youth. There's not the family component like there is with FUP. Now, vouchers are available for the Family Unification Program via a more traditional competitive process. For FYI, there is a second process that is non-competitive, or called the on-demand process, that we'll get into a little later. And it's really what makes FYI unique. Both of these programs offer the housing voucher, which is essentially a rental subsidy, paired with supportive services to help youth sort of get into a lease ultimately, and then to remain stable in their housing for the duration of the voucher. And so those services are offered by the County Child Welfare Agency, and the voucher is administered by the Housing Authority. So this gets into some of the details. Young people who are eligible are between the ages of 18 and 24, so they have not yet turned 25 at the time of their eligibility determination, and then the execution of their housing assistance payment contract. The voucher provides really 3 years, 36 months of housing assistance and the services, and it can be extended for an additional 24 months, 2 years. So really, we're looking at a total of 5 years of support if you maximize what's available. And that extension is available through the Family Self-Sufficiency Program or through participation conditions. We'll also get more into that later. Again, this is administered by HUD in 2 public housing authorities, and then they really partner with County Child Welfare to make this program whole. And like I mentioned, there are 2 processes for administering the voucher to the housing authority. So there's, like I said, a competitive process where there is a notice of funding opportunity released by HUD. And then, this is a traditional process where housing authorities will apply for the to the NOFO. They can apply for a minimum of 3 vouchers and a maximum of 75, but the award size is really based on the housing authority's overall voucher program and the identified need of eligible youth. So if you have a small community or a small housing authority with a small voucher program, you're not going to be able to apply for 75. So it's really based on those standards. And then non-competitively, and I should say competitively, you can get both FYI and FUP vouchers currently competitively. That may change in the future, but right now, that's what's going on. And non-competitively, you can only get FYI vouchers. So that is the new process. It's an innovative process, only available for FYI. And we call those on-demand vouchers or non-competitive vouchers. They're available on a rolling basis. They can be requested throughout the year in batches as little as 1 or as large as 25, and you can get up to 50 in a fiscal year. And Maria will talk about this in a little more detail later, because this is a really important part of understanding FYI and its potential. So we held a community of practice between 2023 and earlier this year, 2024. And we did this in partnership with a national leader who was really has been involved in FYI from the start of it, because was one of the creators of it. And that is National Center for Housing and Child Welfare. So we teamed up sort of state and national partners to really talk about local administration of FYI and FUP for young people in California across 15 counties. We had 15 counties participate. I want to really give props to these counties. This was not required of them. This is something that these 15 counties and their partner agencies chose to do because they want to prevent homelessness among young people leaving foster care, right? So I really want to just acknowledge their commitment. And on the next slide, we've got some really exciting outcomes, but I'll just say that these are the 15 counties. There's also, if you want to see specifically which, the County Child Welfare Agency was present from all of these counties. And then for most of them, there was at least one public housing authority participating. And then in many cases, a contracted service provider serving youth with vouchers. And then sometimes homeless continuums of care as well. So there was partners at the table. If you want to know who the specific agencies were, it is in the appendix in the report if you want to know more details there. We held monthly virtual sessions. The first session was an in-person kickoff, the rest were virtual. And they really alternated between individual technical assistance sessions and then peer learning sessions where all 15 communities came together to talk about technical, sort of topical issues. And so the topics are listed there on the screen. And I'm going to kind of go through this kind of quickly, but again, this will be available later for everyone. The community of practice, really, I thought it was really exciting. We had people who started the community of practice that didn't even have an executed partnership where between the Child Welfare Agency and the Housing Authority. And, you know, during the community of practice that was established, and then they now have vouchers, right? So we also had communities that had several vouchers already, had been doing this for years, and were coming to both be sort of, I could say, almost a mentor to some of the other communities, and then also had a lot of things they still wanted to work on and improve. So we had a wide range of experiences coming to us, and it was a great opportunity to learn from one another. Overall, the number of FYI or vouchers for youth that these 15 counties had increased. And they increased specifically in 11 counties. So 73% of the 15 participating counties increased the number of vouchers during the community of practice. Collectively, the number of vouchers increased 81% across these counties from 529 to 956. So you can imagine, you know, some of these counties were quite small, some were quite large. So really a range, but that was the collective amount. The public housing authorities across 11 counties have now requested FYI vouchers from HUD via the on-demand process. And that's compared to just one community or one county at the start of the community of practice. So there was one county where there was a housing authority that had requested on demand in the beginning. Now there are 11 counties where at least one housing authority is requesting on-demand vouchers. And then sort of from the public housing authority side of it, the number of housing authorities administering FYI FUP vouchers in partnership with County Child Welfare increased overall 64% from 16 housing authorities to 25. And that meant that 5 counties engaged in new partnerships with one or more public housing authorities. So that's sort of the growth we saw quantitatively. And then obviously there's we could talk a lot about the qualitative sort of findings and growth that occurred. And you'll sort of get that, I think, throughout the practices. So I'm going to dive in. We're going to first talk about best practices for county child welfare agencies. Then we'll move over to housing authorities. So the first recommendation or the first practice, recommended practice or policy is expend the county's full allocation of funding from the Housing Navigation and Maintenance Program. And I want to just first say, as you saw, county child welfare agencies are required by HUD to provide or secure supportive services for youth for the duration of their voucher. In 2021, a lack of designated funding for these services was cited by county child welfare agencies as the primary obstacle for implementing or expanding FYI or FUP locally. And so the Housing Navigation and Maintenance Program, or HNMP, which is easier to say, was expanded for this express purpose. So HNMP is an ongoing funding source, but it's administered by the California Department of Housing and Community Development in a manner that's structured more like a one-time grant program. And so it's a different process for counties to go through. They go through an acceptance process with several steps each year. It includes requesting a resolution from the Board of Supervisors, and the expenditure period for each year's HNMP allocation spans really 2 years from the date that the standard agreement is executed between the state and the county. But given that lengthy administrative process leading up to the execution of that agreement, really we're looking at, expenditure deadlines being often like a full 3 years from the time the funding was appropriated in the state budget. So pretty drawn out. So despite this, it is important that county child welfare agencies fully spend their allocation that they get for 1 year over the course of one fiscal year, whether it's that second year, that third year, because if you're not spending it over the course of the fiscal year, you're going to get backed up on spending. And you're not going to be able to reach as many young people. You can really maximize your service capacity by doing this, and that maximizes, probably the number of vouchers you're able to issue to young people. It's also become increasingly important to spend this money because California is in a budget deficit. So HNMP was proposed for elimination in 24-25. It was preserved in the final budget, thank goodness, but it does remain at risk if the program is not, the need for the program is not evident in its spending patterns, despite significant need on the ground. So just wanted to mention that as well. And I should also say that the administrative process has undergone improvements since the inception of the program. And I think it's agreed that, more improvements needed, and there are efforts underway to make those improvements. So here's, I will say, probably the practice that we got most questions about, or I won't say the practice, but the issue that we got most questions and discussion about, really, in our conversations with mostly with county child welfare, and that has to do with service capacity. What we recommend is utilizing multiple resources to expand service capacity, thereby maximizing the number of vouchers that can be that we can support youth with, right? So this is just a little idea about some of the places that counties might look for funding for service capacity. HNMP is an ongoing funding source, but it's $13.7 million. So it's not going to meet full demand statewide, right? In counties with high demand, child welfare agencies often grapple with how to expand their service capacity beyond what that allocation can fund. So this is important because you want to offer the supportive services that young people need to actually lease up and be successful with their voucher. And there's a federal mandate to offer those services, right? This first slide, like I said, really touches on funding. The next slide, we'll talk a little bit about strategy. So you start with HNMP, that's kind of there at the top, state funding provided to county child welfare. And if the county's allocation isn't large enough, you can also look at HNMP's sister program, also administered by HCD, the Transitional Housing Program. While this funding is intended for transitional housing, meaning we literally advocated for it to expand transitional housing, to expand THP Plus, if you're familiar with that program. But technically, it was established with very loose legislative language, and it really allows for maximum local flexibility. So if a county chose, it could reduce the amount of funding that's spending on transitional housing, which covers both rent as well as services, and draw on it for services only, really leveraging that federal rental subsidy provided by HUD through FUP for FYI. So functionally, this would mean a reduction in transitional housing capacity, but an increase in vouchers that would more than make up for the transitional housing capacity loss. So that's just an idea. There are others as well. Once you get outside of county child welfare, this really involves partnership with other county departments or the continuum of care. So we move to the right, state federal funding provided to other county agencies. That could be the Homeless Housing Assistance and Prevention Program. It could be the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program. Again, these would not be a guarantee that these could be used for that. The county child welfare agency would have to work with its county partners to see if that's a priority for those funding sources. And not all communities have YHDP, I should also say. They do all have HAP, the first one I mentioned, but they don't all have the second program I mentioned. Another option I want to highlight before I turn it over to one of our presenters is just drawing on Medi-Cal under the reforms made possible by the California Advancing and Innovating Medi-Cal, or CalAIM, as you're probably more familiar with hearing. So in this scenario, providers contract with managed care plans, and then that can actually fund case management, housing navigation, and housing deposits, just to name a few of the possible uses. The other two circles are pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to move on from those. And before I pass it over to Stephanie and Maria, I just want to say there are a few ways you can do this, right? And this might depend on size of your county or demand. One way is you can just refer youth with vouchers to a provider or providers through a specific contract that are contracted to work with youth with vouchers. On the other side, the right side, you can make vouchers available to youth who are already being served by providers, right? Drawing on their existing resources. So on the left side, one thing just to note is that could result in capping the number of youth that can be served. What we hear from counties is, well, I only have funding to serve, 30 young people, so we're not going to request more than 30 vouchers. So that becomes problematic in counties with a lot of young people. And so it would be important to consider also doing something on the right, because you can do both. It's not one or the other. So on the right, this provides more flexibility and more potential service capacity. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie and Maria to talk a little bit about what they do in Sacramento. And you'll hear a lot of the things I just mentioned, sort of more, less theoretical and more literal what they are doing right now.
Great. Thanks, Simone. Yes, so I wanted to share a little bit about how we in Sacramento County are kind of addressing the issue around supportive services. So we structured our FYI program and process through the utilization of coordinated entry. Now, I know that that has been, is no longer a requirement of FYI, but in Sacramento County, we decided that we were going to continue to use our process through coordinated entry for our referrals for FYI. And, in doing so, recognizing some of the challenges that kind of came with that and putting some different processes in place and changing little, structural pieces and assessments to really address those issues to make this work. And what really we found around doing this is that it did open up FYI really to the community. It became a community resource, not just a resource that child welfare has access to. And we've been able to help our young people get the supportive services they need because they are coming to us with referrals for FYI already connected to a provider, right? And when they're not, when we have youth come to us for an FYI voucher and not connected to a provider, we are first connecting them to a provider that can then refer through our coordinated access system. And we really found that, for one, as child welfare, it really, we were not inundated with, we do have the responsibility to ensure young people are receiving those supportive services, but we weren't inundated with that responsibility. It became the responsibility of all of us in the community. And how we did that was we put some processes in place with our housing authority and with our COC and with all of our providers that are, have MOUs with our COC that are, making those referrals within our homeless management information system. We have I think that what's been the most helpful for us was we have put together a weekly meeting around FYI, and providers in our community, child welfare, our HNMP program, which we do have one in Sacramento County, all folks are attending this meeting. It's led by our housing authority to really kind of troubleshoot all those issues and really kind of maximize the use of our community resources to help young people get access to the vouchers and then eventually get leased up with the vouchers. So it's really what we found helpful for a young person. They don't have, often they're coming to us with a provider of their choice, right? They're already linked to this provider. That provider becomes the point of contact for the voucher and for helping that, young person make their way all the way, through lease up and sometimes beyond. We've been able to, some youth come to us and we've been able to provide multiple community resources. We might have one youth working with, 2 different agencies because of the communication we have in those weekly meetings. I think at this point, we have at least, it's probably more than 10 providers that are making referrals to FYI throughout our coordinated entry process. And we really found, we learned a lot through doing that. For one, we learned that, right, a youth cannot be successful without a connection to a provider in getting leased up. We learned that by making this an issue for the community or a viable resource to them, that all of our service providers have really kind of taken ownership of FYI and they're advocating for, additional resources. We are able to kind of see where the gaps are, and we still, have them as a community, but we are trying to address it as a group. I think by keeping our COC really involved in the process, it really, I think, helps us as a community when if there's funding opportunities, they're recognizing, where the need is for FYI. We have very good communication around our numbers and kind of where we are with how many vouchers we have, how many are leased up. We're really trying to utilize and maximize our use of the vouchers so that we can continue to get more, is really kind of our effort around that. And Simone, you could switch to the next slide, because I just want to share, so really when we're talking about how are we utilizing our funding and how are we maximizing and pooling resources for our youth to get supportive services, well, of course, child welfare, we are getting our money from HCD. We have a HNMP program that really, often is doing the bulk of our FYI referrals and lease ups, but we also have our homeless continuum of care and all of the resources that are out in our community all now know of FYI. They're out there, outreaching. Young people in our community are aware of the resource. Additionally, what's very exciting is CalAIM, right? This is new, although probably on that pie chart, it looks a little larger than we've been able to utilize thus far. But we have a lot of exciting things going on with CalAIM. And for one, our COC is really supporting the integration of CalAIM into our local homeless response system. So it fits very nicely with our choice to kind of make our process go through coordinated entry. We also have some youth serving providers that are now CalAIM providers of community supports and enhanced care management. So being familiar with working with foster youth, they're aware of the FYI voucher, and they've really started to work with our youth that are in that process of transitioning out of extended foster care and accessing FYI. So it's been really very exciting process for us, utilizing the way that we've set up our referral process. It has not come without its challenges. It's still always a work in progress. We are still always kind of communicating and trying to fix various pieces of it. We are not there yet, but we are really kind of making a lot of progress around how we're ensuring that youth have access to this voucher. And Maria, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that.
No, I think, thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Great.
Oh,
Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, Maria. I thought you said are you
hi.
Are you gonna share?
Okay.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
In Sacramento, the reason we all are reporting within our housing authority and going to the centralized system with the COC and reporting in homeless management, so HMIS and the homeless management information system, is every homeless individual is being registered. And we can corroborate when we do our meetings that maybe by chance is an FYI voucher appropriate, or we have a youth aging out and we now can't use the FYI voucher. And so by having all of the referrals and everybody in a centralized system, we can then switch the referral to another program, to a project-based unit, and we can follow up and see what the outcomes are of all of our efforts in Sacramento County on, are we successful with leasing up homeless, not only youth, but other former homeless individuals. So that is why in Sacramento it has worked. It was a labor of love of many meetings and planning, and it has taken years to get to this point. But now that we have been able to reach a successful transition, it works very well, as long as everybody does the same thing. We all report, we all use the referrals through the one centralized system, and that makes us successful in our county moving forward.
Great. Thank you so much, the two of you. I have a feeling we'll get a lot of questions for the chat. So more on that later. I'm going to move us on to the next recommended practice, So establish baseline activities or expectations for any parties assisting youth from the point of applying for their voucher to leasing up. So, there's sort of, or at least the way that I look at it, I really think of the front end of the time of applying to the voucher, for the voucher, doing the housing navigation or the housing search, and then leasing up and getting sort of settled and stable in housing. That's sort of one phase. And then there's the ongoing services for young people for the duration of the voucher. Those are two sort of different experiences. And the front end services, or some call like the transitory services, those are sort of specific. We always talk about meeting young people where they are and individualized case management, and that's really important. But for these front end activities, it is really important that there are baseline expectations or specific activities that are very aligned and very tailored to getting youth successfully leased up. So it's important that we pair, providers or whomever is providing that support, that we pair folks who have those skills and expertise and knowledge of what those practices are, or those activities are, with young people during that sort of housing search, et cetera, phase. It's also important that those services that is some monetary support. So as you all know, when you move into an apartment, there are costs. First and foremost, there's a security deposit. There's also other moving costs. And so often, because the voucher is a rental subsidy. It's not providing a bunch of upfront costs for security deposit, et cetera. So that's something that young people do need help paying. So all the things you see on the screen there are really important to incorporate into those front end activities. It's not just going to be case management, right? That comes later, and that it can be layered with these services, but we've really got to make sure that these are happening on the front end of that voucher period. And then sort of on the other end, right, once you're settled in housing and you're being offered ongoing support, not every young person will want that support, but many will. And sometimes counties contract, for these services. They often contract for these services. And it's important that in executing those contracts for ongoing service provision, that we allow for variation in intensity of the intervention based on the individual needs of the youth, right? So you want to make sure that the nature of the services are that they're optional. You want to make sure that is made clear. You want to make sure that the provider can tailor the type and the intensity and the frequency of the services really based on those individual needs. So if a young person doesn't need, intense services, then we don't need to offer those. It doesn't have to be like a cookie cutter, very like this many contacts, very explicit things for every young person. It can be tailored to each young person. And then some young people, like I said, they may not want services, and that's fine. Of course, you can continue to offer them because sometimes it takes a little while, but we don't want to make it it's definitely not requisite. It's not required to have that voucher, right? And any accountability concerns that people might have, you could sort of assuage those with employing a waiver if that was something you felt you needed to do for youth who wanted to opt out of ongoing services. Just an option, definitely not required. And then for counties with multiple housing authorities, this may be common sense, but recruit as many as possible to partner in FYI and FUP, because that really maximizes the number of youth that can be served and the areas in which youth can reside. So each public housing authority, as we've sort of touched on here, can request up to 50 non-competitive vouchers annually. And then they also can get competitive vouchers, right? The other reason that this is important is it does have to do with geography. If you are a city housing authority, the jurisdiction is governed by the housing authority. So if you're getting your voucher from a city housing authority, you are going to have to reside in that city for at least 1 year. You can what's called port your voucher out of that city later if you want, but you've got to be there for at least a year. And those are really housing choice voucher rules. That's not specific to FUP and FYI. That's a more general rule with these vouchers. And then if you're a county housing authority, you either, depending on what county it is, it's really going to cover, cities in that county without housing authorities or unincorporated areas of that county. Or it may cover the whole county if especially if you're in a smaller county and there are no city housing authorities. You know, you can see it's important where you get your voucher from. And so as the child welfare agency, you're going to want to partner with as many housing authorities as you can to cover that geographic area. So, just want to check us for time here real quick. All right. So in recruiting public housing authorities to partner on FYI and FUP, it's great to highlight recent policy changes and then also the robust support role of county child welfare. It can also help to sort of call on priorities of local government. So one example is, you know, we'll say LA County and Alameda County. You know, LA County has 20 housing authorities, if you can believe it. If you live in LA County, you're not surprised. If you don't live in LA County and you didn't realize how big it was, that just told you how big it was, right? So, or it is. And so, you know, certainly the County Child Welfare Agency does not partner with all 20 of those counties on FYI and FUP. And so quite recently, this sort of started with community of practice, really like trying to go and have conversations with various housing authorities to recruit them to participate and partner with County Child Welfare. And then post the community of practice, some local advocates have really continued that mission and there's been great success. LADCFS has really had success in recruiting, I think like 7 to 12 new housing authorities, and they were originally working with 3. So really, really exciting. But a big part of that recruitment effort was, first of all, making known that there's the on-demand process. You don't have to apply competitively. You can apply for just a few vouchers if you're a very small housing authority. And then also there have been recent policy changes, which we'll highlight again later, but to improve accessibility, having to do with exemptions to this minimum voucher utilization rate that was required. And so that has been really helpful in sort of making the case for housing authorities to come on board and offer this program. And then also really important is the support provided by child welfare, right? So this is not something the housing authority is doing alone. And then lastly, local government, Board of Supervisors, City Council can be helpful in establishing former foster youth as a priority population for its housing authorities if you feel like it needs to happen at that level to really engage the community around this population. All right. I think we have, oh no, there we go. I thought I had the same slide twice. Okay, so the next one is establish a county policy, making referral to FYI or transitional housing a mandatory step leading up to the 90-day transition planning or earlier for foster youth preparing to exit the system. So California requires a 90-day transition plan for non-minor dependents leaving foster care. And, you know, non-minor dependents are 18, 19, and 20-year-olds that are participating in what we call extended foster care. When they turn 21, they exit. So there's a planning process that is supposed to be happening leading up to that 21st birthday. We've also had legislation pass recently, AB 674 took effect in 2022, which requires the last scheduled court review hearing for a non-minor dependent to include information about housing referrals and efforts towards stable housing. And then there's been state guidance issued that specifically encourage counties to utilize FUP, which is inclusive of FYI really, to meet this requirement. So that's all great. One thing we want to encourage counties to do is really to ensure timely requests to start these planning conversations and make the FYI referral even earlier than 90 days. Some people say even up to a year to get the ball rolling. And then the housing authority can submit sort of when the right time is. But, you know, we shouldn't start the planning conversations 3 months out from exiting, obviously. So this is something that should be incorporated, you know, into that final year of being in care. And FYI is a great resource to fill in the gaps and a go-to to ensure that no young people are leaving care into unstable housing or homelessness, of course. So, prioritize and expedite FYI FUP vouchers for youth close to reaching the eligible upper age limit of 25. So housing authorities are required, and county child welfare agencies, when they partner on FYI and FUP, they are required to have a prioritization process for how they issue vouchers. And youth must be no more than 24 years old at the time of eligibility certification and the execution of the housing assistance payment contract. That means if you were 24, your time is short. You can keep the voucher once you turn 25, as long as you're in that contract, but it has to be executed by the time you're 25, before 25. So given the time it might take, from the time of application to, execution of the HAP contract, we've got to ensure that, these young people, are prioritized if they're 24. You can also try to maybe expedite the process for any youth that are really close to turning 25. We want to make sure that we, this is potentially 5 years of support, rental subsidy and support that young people could miss out on if they turn 25 before that contract's executed. So this is something that you definitely want to have high on the list in your prioritization process. All right. In smaller counties with less demand, consider stacking vouchers with transitional housing to create a longer runway of housing support. So I'm going to have Felice talk about this, about how they do this in Marin. But I just want to sort of preface that by saying, counties with large foster care populations often draw on both vouchers and transitional housing in attempt to meet demand for youth leaving foster care out of necessity, right? We just don't have enough of it for it to go around often, unfortunately. But smaller counties don't always run into that. They might have a level of demand that it actually exceeds their transitional housing, they may not have a level of demand that exceeds their transitional housing capacity. And that really provides them the opportunity to offer a voucher after transitional housing. This is particularly resourceful in counties with high housing costs, like Marin. So I'm going to pass this over to Felice so she can talk a little bit about what this looks like in Marin.
Thanks, Simone, and thanks for coming up with the term stacking. I've been trying to figure out a way to best describe our approach of maximizing our housing assistance resources. So I'll just jump right in, beginning with the extended foster care phase. This is the phase where we have our social workers are working with youth and developing their transitional living plan. And when they turn 21, they'll get referred to our transitional housing program, or THP Plus program. We currently have 7 beds for our transitional housing program plus, and we are our THP Plus provider is constantly monitoring who is in that program. I get a monthly list and I can see who's turning 24, and together we're kind of comparing who's on our non-minor dependent caseload, who's going to be turning 21, and who's going to be turning 24 is currently in our THP Plus program, and with the goal of trying to ensure that there's not a wait list or any backlog. And again, as Simone mentioned, we're a small county, so we're able to sort of get a grasp on that. And then when THP Plus participant turns 24, we refer them right away to FYI. We understand that could be a potentially lengthy process, and since the FYI voucher is inclusive to 25, we'll go ahead and make that referral when they turn 24. And if the FYI voucher holder agrees to participate in the family self-sufficiency program, that gives them another 2 years extension on that voucher. So theoretically, you could have a youth or a young person receiving housing support or housing assistance till they're 29. So that not only allows us to maximize our limited housing resources in a county that's so expensive, but it also allows us to maximize that planning process, gives us more time to plan to help develop a plan for our housing stability for those youth. So yeah. Thanks, Simone.
Thank you, Felice. All right. So our next one, and we're almost through the county child welfare practices, and then we will move to housing authorities. And we have a little less housing authority practices, just to kind of give you all a sense of time here. So maintain and actively manage a waiting list for FYI FUP vouchers. So I realize kind of as I'm reading this, This is a recommendation for the County Child Welfare Agency. Now, there's an official waiting list that is managed by the Housing Authority for vouchers. What this is suggesting is County Child Welfare maintaining its own little list of young people specifically wanting FYI or FUP vouchers, sort of as a backup, for one reason. It really enables the County Child Welfare Agency to continue to accept voucher referrals on a rolling basis, even if there's vouchers unavailable at that moment. And even if the Housing Authority has temporarily closed the official voucher waiting list, you're still able to understand, what's the demand, who are the young people on this list. It also allows for efficient reissuing of vouchers. If you keep sort of a more inclusive list of young people that could potentially be called on if there's an available voucher, and if for some reason the Housing Authority's list didn't have a fully inclusive list based on it being closed for a while. It's also an opportunity for the county to assist young people with other resources. So if you're waiting on a waiting list and you're homeless or you're in a precarious housing situation, we'd hope that there could be other resources that might be able to be offered in the meantime. And then lastly, waiting lists can be a rough proxy for need, which can help inform the development of goals in terms of how many vouchers do we think we need? How much transitional housing do we think we need? What other sorts of supports do we need as a community? And then ensure key personnel and community stakeholders are aware of and informed about FYI FUP eligibility and the local referral process. So this is one of those probably pretty obvious ones. I think this and the next one. But it's worth saying, we hear so much that there's a lot of confusion about FYI. And not just confusion, but a lack of knowledge about the local referral process. How long does it take? Who do I call? What does that referral process consist of? Young people at the youth level, like young people need to know what to expect. They need to know how long to wait and what's going to happen. And so the people working with young people need to know that so they can relay that. And so it's important to do regular training for County Child Welfare Agency personnel or probation officers that work with young people in care, or other folks sort of within the county that are official sort of case managers. That would be really important to do regular training on, is what this process is and what are the local housing resources, including FYI. And then there are several community partners. This is certainly not an exhaustive list that should be informed about that process as well, right? Foster care providers, other CBOs that are serving young people, coordinated entry system personnel, because they are great referral partners that can identify young people coming through coordinated entry. College campus foster youth support programs, McKinney-Vento liaisons, legal aid, serving young people. So it's a really good idea to get your program in order, but make sure that there's outward communication about it that's meeting the needs of the community. And then lastly, you got to meet with people, right? So we've heard loud and clear from communities in the community of practice, from counties and housing authorities in the community of practice, that arranging a standing meeting of all local partners involved in the administration of vouchers really ensures sort of efficient and effective processes remain in place. Communities with strong established partnerships, maybe a monthly meeting suffices for them. Maybe it's more frequent. But budding partnerships, like especially those who are, haven't yet requested vouchers, they're getting their sort of process in order. Usually it's much more frequent, right? At least until you get your sort of, get your rhythm. And this would obviously include the core folks in the center of that little graphic, the Child Welfare Agency and the Housing Authority. And then the kind of, lighter turquoise, if you have any contracted service providers working with voucher holders or other service providers working with voucher holders, they're great to involve. Any partners that are conducting landlord recruitment, which we'll talk about in a second, would be great to include. And then also there's additional really important referral partners that even if they're not in every standing meeting, it's really good to keep them, they're part of the team, right? Again, the homeless continuum of care is making referrals if youth come through coordinated entry. Legal aid can also be great with referrals and also deal with any weird tenant issues that come up, right? There's also, other CBOs in the community referring youth. So I'm going to turn now to housing authorities, and we're going to talk a little bit about these practices and hear from Samantha and Maria. So the first one is ensure landlord recruitment is an integral part of the local FYI FUP program. This was by far one of the biggest topics. This and the service capacity issue was the biggest topics in the community of practice. You can see on the screen what some of these, practices are, but essentially, recruitment of landlords is really, it's an essential ingredient to a successful FYI or FUP program. Where youth are able to lease up quickly and the housing authority is able to maintain a high voucher utilization rate. Even though there are exemptions, the housing authority still wants to maintain that high rate, and the exemptions are not guaranteed. So it is really important, not just because we want youth to lease up quickly, but also because part of this is efficient administration is, making sure you've got a smoothly running program. So landlord recruitment is often achieved through the provision of various types of incentives, and that's what you're seeing on the screen there. Housing authorities often have staff that may conduct these types of activities, or they may work with, some sort of community-based organization with appropriate expertise on this. And these are eligible uses, I do want to note, of HNMP. So the County Child Welfare Agency receives that. They could provide some of that to the housing authority to conduct these activities. That is absolutely allowable. All right, so for housing authorities in communities with large foster care populations, it's important to utilize probably both the competitive and the non-competitive voucher request process. Like we sort of alluded to earlier, it really maximizes the number of vouchers you can receive. And the on-demand nature of FUP and of FYI, that should probably only say FYI there on the screen, makes FYI a really critical and unique tool for social workers and probation officers. So it's really, we really encourage, housing authorities to make those on-demand voucher, to participate in the on-demand voucher process. I'm going to turn it over to Maria to just talk through a little bit about what that process looks like, so that people can, especially from the housing authority community that may not be familiar with it yet, here's your chance to get a little more familiar with it.
Good morning. So you, as a housing authority, if you are a housing authority, can request up to 25 vouchers at a time through the non-competitive process. So HUD released a competitive NOFA where you could be awarded vouchers if you had certain requirements. They released a PIH notice 2023-04 of making available up to $15 million for non-competitive vouchers. So as a housing authority reaches the utilization rates that are in the notice, you can apply for additional vouchers, and you can apply for 1, 5, or up to 25 at a time. You can get total in a fiscal year, so this is based on the HUD's federal fiscal year of October 1st to September 30th, up to 50 non-competitive vouchers. If the housing authority has 10 vouchers or less, it must be at 50% utilization. If you have over 11 vouchers, then you have to be at 90%. But if you can't meet that utilization, you can still request vouchers if you meet the exemption requirements. Next slide, please. So what are these exemption requirements? They have these alternative requirements to utilization. One is that if you have awarded project-based units to dedicated for FYI. So you have a project base that's under construction, not yet, that can be utilized. You can submit the documentation that you submitted to HUD requesting for the additional vouchers for project base, and you can use that as your alternative requirement in order to meet your 90% utilization rate. The other option is for families searching for a unit. So in Sacramento, we have a lot of difficulty with leasing. That's why we have taken such a strong approach to try to help our FYI youth. And so we do have all of our vouchers out on the street. Not everybody's leased. So in order to meet the requirement of getting the additional vouchers, we provide a narrative, no more than 2 pages to HUD, stating what is going on in Sacramento. So we've leased how many vouchers, we have this many out on the street, this many RFTAs in process, we provide all the documentation in order to meet the alternative requirements to utilization, since we're not 90% leased in Sacramento County. So that is how you would be able to meet the requirements if you're not at your utilization rate. The application process is somewhat very simple. There's an online application form that needs to be completed. I highly recommend, because in Sacramento, we have our executive director complete it. So I did a mock-up form because it's quite a few questions of what the answers are going to be. So do the mock-up and send it off so that your directors can submit. And then from there, they complete and submit a HUD 52515. And then the additional documentation for the alternative requirements, if they're applicable and you're not meeting the current utilization based on what's reported in VMS. So with your monthly reporting to the voucher management system, if you are not seeing that you're at 90% utilization, then you would need to submit the alternative requirements to HUD. And in the PIH notice, it has all of these details. It has the links for the online application form. It also has the email addresses of where you need to send everything, because the 52515 goes into one email. They have the narratives also that need to be sent and coded in a certain way in order for your response. And the HUD representatives respond fairly quickly. So once you submit and you've provided all the documentation, they do reply fairly quickly. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. And I should say I don't work at a housing authority, but when you look at the form that you're filling out to request an on-demand voucher, it is much less pages than responding to a competitive NOFA. So right, Maria, so a housing authority that wants maybe a simpler process, that would be something to consider. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, a NOFA takes quite a bit more to put together in order to apply. The actual form that is completed is like 18 questions. They're very simple. You know, what's your PHA number? Who's the information? It asks for the youth that you've identified. That is something that needs to be provided. So either initials or names, or we in Sacramento assign codes. But the actual questionnaire is very simple to complete, so it can be done fairly quickly. But I do recommend that, unless your director knows all this information, to just have it. I do it in a Word document, and then they copy over the information so it can be submitted to HUD.
Thank you. All right, so our next one is this is another one that we definitely want to spread awareness about if there is a lack of awareness about this resource. So establish policies that will lead to awareness of and participation in the 2-year voucher extension. So there were amendments to the federal legislation that wrote FYI into federal law, which is called the Fostering Stable Housing and Opportunities Act, or FSHO, as we call it for short. And so the 2022 amendments require housing authorities to offer youth with FYI or FUP vouchers the opportunity to extend their vouchers for an additional 2 years via 2 possible routes. The first one is participating in what's called the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, which is a program that many housing authorities offer. The second one is by fulfilling certain participation conditions, if the housing authority doesn't offer FSS or if it's impacted. And for those that are familiar with extended foster care, the participations are very similar to extended foster care participation conditions. So it shouldn't be that sort of foreign to young people who have been in extended foster care. The Family Self-Sufficiency Program is interesting. You know, you don't just get the extension, there's other benefits to it. So you execute an FSS action plan, and the voucher holder must be employed, provides, and the program provides and or coordinates services for the voucher holder. And if you're in FSS, there is an interest-bearing escrow account established for you. This is one thing I really like about it. Any increases in the voucher holder's rent, that, you know, your rent increases if your earned income increases, because it's based on a percentage of your income. So any increases in that rent that you have to pay actually result in a credit to the escrow account for young people to take with them when they exit. So I really like that model. It helps you save but at the same time teaching self-sufficiency, right? So that's what that looks like. If you can't be in that program, you can also fulfill the participation conditions that are sort of associated with the program. And you can see what those are there. And then you also get it's really two 12-month extensions is what you're looking at. And I'm going to pass it to first to Marin, to Samantha and Marin, and also to Maria in Sacramento, just to talk a little bit about how they promote FSS at their housing authority. So Samantha, passing it to you.
Sure. And could you go back to the slide before? I just want to make one comment that at the time of enrollment of FSS, a voucher holder doesn't have to be employed. Employment is typically the final goal of a participant in FSS, so they don't have to be employed at enrollment. I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the service component helps to kind of progress a participant in FSS to become employed, which is the goal. So here in Marin, we do have our family self-sufficiency program. We have a relatively small FYI voucher program. We have currently, I believe, 6 individuals with another 3 that have been referred to us. And so our initial voucher holders weren't enrolled in FSS, and when that change happened, that's when we kind of created this idea of how we would engage the upcoming people that have been referred. So currently we do have a pretty robust housing locator program. So all incoming FYI voucher holders are assigned to a housing locator, and the housing locators do the briefings in person. At the time of briefing, it's a lot of information. Our housing locators tend to be with the family for around 2 hours to really go through an extensive briefing and discussing how they're going to be searching for housing as well. So we didn't want to overwhelm the participants with the family self-sufficiency, but at the same time, we really wanted to promote it at the very beginning and incorporate it into the briefing. So we do have our family FSS coordinator. We have 3 coordinators here. We have someone come into the briefing that could potentially work with them in the future once they've identified and secured housing, and give a really brief overview. It allows for the coordinator to also meet the service provider if they come to the briefing, and kind of create that flow of communication as well. And then we have a housing analyst here who works closely in kind of determining where people are in the intake process. So once a youth is leased up, then the coordinator can come back to the youth, start engaging in that process. The goal is to get people to sign up for FSS at the very beginning of that 3-year time period, so that their extensions, if they are in good standing in the family self-sufficiency program, will kind of correlate with their 5-year maximum. The FSS program is a 5-year program. And so that's kind of been our goal. It's worked out so far. And all of our FYI voucher holders were or are enrolled in family self-sufficiency.
Maria, please jump in.
So in Sacramento, our program is larger. We currently have 98 FYI FUP vouchers. So we cannot enroll everyone into FSS. We've reached capacity for our FSS program. What we do though, is for every youth that comes into our program and is housed, we automatically add them into the FSS email blasts that are sent. So youth are notified of all job fairs, upcoming events, anything that's going on, and join the waiting list if they choose to join FSS. So when we have an open spot, we can fill those with the youth. But that way, they're still sent the information of what's going on in our community in order to help them if they are looking for, a job fair or something like that, they then get all the notifications that our FSS coordinators send out in order to help. And they do lots of different, they have classes, they have all kinds of things that they email out for within the FSS program.
Maria, just, I know we'll save questions for the end, but just something really specific here. Someone asked if they can get contact info for the Sac County mailing list you're talking about. Is that something that is specific to people who are in housing with vouchers, or is it something broader?
It is specific for the voucher holders. It is, our FSS coordinators send out, I would say a couple of times a week, different announcements, job fairs. They have clinics for financial, all kinds of different kinds of classes that we get notifications from within our community. And so they email blast the list in order to notify everybody. Do you need financial planning or credit improvement or, something, credit building? So they do send those notifications out, and they work with the different participants within the program. But for the youth that can't get on quite yet, and even though FSS is a 5-year program, we really do try, especially when the youth have been on the program for 3 years, to really get them in so they can use the extensions and use the alternative requirements in order to get the extensions to reach for the 5 years. So that is important for us to continue offering assistance as long as we can.
Great, thank you both of you for that information. So our next practice, actually, someone asked about this in the chat, so your question's getting answered right now. The next recommended practice is transition youth to a permanent housing choice voucher upon the expiration of their FYI or FUP voucher. So as we know here from this presentation, right, FUP vouchers, FYI vouchers are time limited to 3 years or, 5 years with the FSS extension. And, that can present youth with housing challenges. We know what this California housing market is, and we know how much money people make when they're 18, 19, 20, up to 25. Income is not that high yet, right? The cost of housing makes being stable in your 20s independently with no, family support potentially, really hard. And so, federal guidelines do permit housing authorities discretion to establish local preferences to reflect the housing needs and priorities of their community. So this is absolutely allowable. A housing authority could prioritize young people for permanent vouchers, just housing choice vouchers. That's something that some communities are doing. And some communities are even, thinking I could do this for a specific subpopulation, like parenting youth. Parenting youth have a more vulnerable situation. But I want to turn it over to Samantha to talk a little bit about, again, not theoretically, but literally talk a little bit about this, but we'll stick on this slide for now.
So I have not too much to say about this for Marin Housing Authority. I will say this is something that we are taking into consideration. It's not something that we have done as of today. In order to create that local preference for our housing choice voucher waiting list, there is a series of things that we need to consider. So we are looking at a couple of things such as, if there should be a requirement for a family or a youth to be in the FSS program in order to be considered for this preference. But it is something that we are considering because one, the program is small. We have 7 people right now that are in the program. So, it's a possibility we'll only have a few people each year essentially that would need this, and our housing costs are just so high in Marin. So we're kind of assessing the folks that we currently have that would be exiting the program in the next year or so. And the challenge is that they would face potential challenges around being able to stay in Marin County if they don't have that subsidy. So it is something that we're considering, but again, there's a whole process that you have to go through as a housing authority, such as putting it out for public comment, going through our resident advisory board, taking it to our board of commissioners, before something like that could go through.
Thanks, Samantha, for shedding light on that process. All right, so we have a couple more practices to talk about, and then we'll start closing out and get to Q&A. So do not require FYI FUP referral minimums before submitting voucher requests to HUD. Now that's something that we recommend. We know it's not always possible. Every housing authority has different different levels of capacity and availability administratively, but it's definitely something that is a strong practice to not require these minimums. Utilizing the on-demand voucher request process, you can get one voucher if you have one young person who's needs housing right now. You can get 5 vouchers, you can get 10, right? You can get up to 25. To streamline administration, some housing authorities understandably have issued a policy saying, we're going to wait till we get a minimum number of referrals before we submit the voucher request to HUD, because it allows it, it streamlines it a little bit, right? But as you can imagine, this practice unintentionally creates a real delay for young people who've completed their application process but are waiting for the referral list to reach that maximum. And it can have serious consequences if you are, obviously, if you're currently homeless, or if you're unstably housed, if you're in a precarious situation that's sort of going to bust up any day now and you could be homeless. So that's something we really, discourage are those referral minimums. And then for housing authorities with impacted housing choice voucher programs, we, hope to see housing authorities, reopen their waiting list to accept FYI eligible youth without opening the waiting list for other applicants. That's something HUD allows for. It basically, when a housing authority is overwhelmed with demand, they may temporarily close their waiting list. And unfortunately, this prevents a housing authority from even submitting, an on-demand request for an FYI voucher, because HUD requires housing authorities to first add youth to their waiting list, their voucher waiting list, in order to ensure there's no one that's FYI eligible ahead of them. So it's sort of a technical thing that has to happen before vouchers are issued. And so if that waiting list is closed, it prevents that process from happening. So HUD permits housing authorities, sort of as a workaround, they permit housing authorities with closed voucher waiting lists to temporarily reopen their waiting list to accept an FYI eligible youth without opening it for other applicants. This can prevent delays in administering FYI vouchers. It does require certain noticing. It's not as, it's not easy as 1, 2, 3, but it's absolutely doable. And it's something that we recommend. So I believe this is our last practice. Yes, continue to use awarded FYI or FUP vouchers for eligible youth upon turnover. This might be a no-brainer for people, but we always want to include those as well, because not everyone's as aware of how these programs work. So once a youth's FYI or FUP voucher expires, or if a youth fails to use it, HUD permits housing authorities to retain the voucher and then to issue it to another young person. It's also important to spread awareness about that, because for FYI in the very early years, this wasn't exactly the case, and that has shifted. And so just to make sure everyone's clear, that is the case for all, currently issued, FYI and certainly FUP vouchers. If another eligible youth is not identified, the housing authority has to report that to HUD by the end of the calendar year, and then that readjusts the housing authority's voucher allotment. So they lose the voucher. Given the demand that we see in some communities, as well as the administrative workload associated with voucher requests, and the fact that there's no guarantee that utilization rate would be waived if you didn't meet it and you were trying to request another voucher, it's really just best to work closely with child welfare to ensure turned over or unutilized vouchers can be reissued. It's really the, best case scenario. So with that, I'm going to move us into resources and upcoming events. This will be quick, and then we'll go into Q&A. So these are listed in the publication, so I won't go into great detail, but we did want to make these available. The first one is the FYI FUP point of contact roster that we developed, I think, a couple of years back. It does need updating, and the reason we didn't update it for this webinar is because we will be doing our sort of what we've done for a couple of years, is doing a sort of inventory of how many vouchers there are statewide for young people in California, and also how many transitional housing slots there are. And we're doing that in November. Or if you're a county child welfare agency, you'll be getting a survey very soon, but the report will be issued in November. And in that process, we'll also be updating this roster. So that roster is there. It has the housing authority, the county child welfare agency point of contact, if there's an associated service provider, and all of that information, and it's organized by county. And if you want to send us updates, you can, and we will also be soliciting those leading up to the November report. There's also, so Youth Law Center, and I want to acknowledge Youth Law Center because they've been leading several other advocates across the state in, promoting awareness about FYI, engaging housing authorities, new housing authorities, and they've also kind of spearheaded several resources in partnership with several advocacy organizations. And so this one here is a list of FYI resources and tools for advocates in California and nationwide. And there's a whole long list of resources at that link. And I also want to acknowledge Ruth Ann White for National Center on Housing and Child Welfare, our partner in the community of practice. But I also just want to say, Ruthie has been not just partnering on this community of practice, but for years, just providing ad hoc help to anyone who needs it, getting their FYI programs figured out. And so she's sort of a national FYI celebrity, for lack of better words. And so I just want to acknowledge all the help she's given to California communities. And then the last resource here is not specific at all to FYI, but I know when people said CalAIM, it's like, what, huh? We want to use CalAIM for this. So this is just a really good technical assistance publication developed by Public Works Alliance and California Children's Trust to help nonprofits, think through the various CalAIM reform opportunities and whether it's the right opportunity for them. And then some upcoming sessions. So the CWDA, County Welfare Directors Association of California, they have an annual conference in October. And we'll be doing a workshop on FYI at that conference on Thursday, October 10th. And so, if you're going to that conference, please attend the workshop. And then if you're not and you want to register, there's the link. I think you have to register in the next 2 days though. So do that quickly if you want to register. And it's really geared toward county personnel. Blueprint for Success Conference is a conference hosted by JBay, by us. The conference focuses on supporting foster youth and post-secondary education, but we are doing a housing related workshop there, really to talk through housing resources for current and former foster youth, including FYI, on Tuesday, October 29th from 9:45 to 11. The conference is the 28th and 29th. You can register at that link. There is a webinar that a national partner is doing. So Corporation for Supportive Housing, in partnership with Casey Family Programs, is hosting a webinar that is perfectly aligned with this one in the sense that we talk a lot about service capacity. That's a big issue people raise. This focuses all about that. So these are really national models and policy opportunities to fund supportive services. It says families, but it's inclusive of transition age youth. So vouchers for both families or transition age youth. And they're going to go over some of the national models they see for providing services. So if you want to know what's going on beyond California, this is a great one to join. I'm going to try to join it as well. And before we turn to Q&A, I just want to again thank our presenters, but also thank the whole community of practice for, rocking with us for a year. We learned from you, you learned from each other. It was a great experience. And I just want to say that before we dive in. So Q&A, I'm going to go through these questions and pitch them to our panelists, or maybe answer a few myself. So first, I just want to say, yes, the recording and the slides will be available. And we'll send those out later today to everyone who registered. So one question is about the 2024-25 allocation for the Housing Navigation and Maintenance Program and the Transitional Housing Program. Someone asked, what has the state released that allocation? So this is a great place to do an update. There is a delay this year in the allocations coming out because they are determining amounts based on data. So that is, and the process for getting that data has unfortunately changed. And so there is a delay. I think you all received a notice from HCD about that delay. I'm hearing that it's coming together in the next couple months. And this is one of the things that has prompted some of our advocacy to improve this state administration, something we're looking at for the current fiscal year. So more to come there, but no, they have not released the allocation, and that is why. And that's something that we hope to improve for next year. Another question. So someone's asking about suggestions for undocumented youth. So I'd love to ask, let's see, I think Maria, maybe, do you want to talk a little bit about how your housing authority handles, like what that, if you're undocumented, what that means for a voucher?
So when you're undocumented, if there's not a qualifying household member, unfortunately, the availability of voucher or project-based assistance is not an option. What we have in Sacramento County is then we have transitional homes and other options where it's outside of the housing authority and they may not have those requirements. So that's why through the referrals, through the COC, they can, if we deny based on not meeting eligibility, they'll move that referral into some other program. But unless there is a qualifying member, and we've also found even when there is a qualifying, let's say minor or somebody that has the eligibility for the citizenship requirement, we still have a hard time leasing because of the proration factor. So that is another consideration with the undocumented youth.
Thank you. Someone also just asked, are there undocumented youth in foster care? Yes, there are. So that is something that we see. And someone said that the link I shared earlier in the chat is broken. So I will look at that, and anything that I've sent out that is broken, I will resend out in the email today. One question someone asked is, how are counties recruiting landlords to partner with them? So we talked a little bit about that earlier. I want to see if Samantha or Maria, like if either of you have additional tips or thoughts for folks that are trying to engage landlords.
I can answer that. Again, Marin is a relatively small community. We started what we call our landlord partnership program back in 2017. We received funds from the county to offer. It's kind of similar to other landlord partnership programs that are operating now through various vouchers. But we, at that time, were offering things like security deposits, bonuses, vacancy loss. So we started that program back in 2017. We do have a team of 3 housing locators as well as a supervisor whose sole, responsibility is to go out and engage with landlords and work with tenants who might be having retention concerns or issues and help them get back on track as well. We have a housing liaison who is part of the locator department, who again works with folks that come through coordinated entry who might be falling out of housing, and works with both the resident and the landlord to kind of maintain those relationships. So we've been operating that program, and it's been super successful.
Thank you.
Sacramento.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sacramento also at times has offered landlord incentives. We worked with Emergency Solution Grant money last year in order to offer incentives. We do have a housing liaison. Our program is large in Sacramento County. Altogether, we're over 14,000 vouchers. So we unfortunately can't do as much outreach as we would like. But what we do now is we do quarterly meetings for landlords and potential landlords. We have monthly new landlord Zoom meetings so they can come and find out about our program. And then we've been initiating, based on feedback, how can we make our program more efficient so that landlords find it easy to work with us. And so that's been an ongoing process in order for landlord recruitment. We also have shifted all of our advertising and available units into affordablehousing.com and are working with them in order to have one centralized location that we can refer to where our landlords post their units and they can lease from. So we are finding that affordable housing has been working in Sacramento housing, and it's increasing in our there's different filters. People can search for accessible units, non-accessible, whatever they're looking for, whatever area, because Sacramento Housing Authority is not only the city, but it is also the county. We are a joint powers agency, so we have a wide area, and so having all of the available units in that one location also helps.
Thank you. One thing I should have done earlier, as I'm looking at a question, is literally define what the voucher utilization rate is. Samantha, can you maybe just say what that is, so that it's really clear? Because I realized we sort of talked around it a little bit.
Sure. I mean, so in this context, it would be how many vouchers the housing authority has been allocated, and how many contracts have been executed. So how many units of those that we have leased. So housing authority wants that to be on the higher end. I don't know, Maria, if you have anything else to chime in there.
Good.
Thank you. I think someone was just like, what does that utilization rate actually mean, right? So one question we got, Stephanie, this is for you. The question is this was asked during your presentation, I think, who requests vouchers? If it's more than one provider, who monitors the number of vouchers? So requested. So sort of, you're mentioning you have many providers that are making referrals. Can you talk a little bit about what that process is? And I would love for you to mention the dashboard you have, or maybe I'm not using the right word, the database that you're using to communicate with all your partners, and you guys can all see what I'm talking about.
Yes, thanks. So the provider would initially make that referral in HMIS, and then they would complete the FYI. We have a FYI assessment that we created built into our HMIS system that a provider would complete, that then our COC reviews, and then that is then sent to child welfare to certify the foster care eligibility. And we utilize that through DocuSign, which then generates that referral that goes to SHRA and to the provider to let them know whether or not that youth was eligible or not. And then it's SHRA that then sends the application to the provider and the youth. So the nice thing about going through the HMIS is there's a point of contact in there, and that's who gets kind of attached to that FYI voucher process. So then everything gets sent to them. They start that process. When I talked about before, we had that weekly meeting that all providers come to. Once a provider makes a referral to FYI and is in that application process, then they get access to box.com. That's what SHRA is utilizing to keep all of our data around, our utilization rate, how many vouchers we have, how many youth are leased up, how many applications are still pending. And then it's individualized for all the youth. So they're keeping track of the timelines when vouchers are expiring. When applications are pending, it's keeping track of what is SHRA still waiting on? What document do they need? Where is it in the process? It also has a section for RFTAs when a youth has identified a unit and they are in that process of getting that unit approved. So any provider who's made the referral and is a POC for that young person can access this system to really see where it is in the process from, referral all the way through to lease up.
And that's through this box.com, right? That's not through HMIS, right?
No, right. And it's SHRA that really sort of mans that. Go ahead, Maria.
Yeah, so what happened was we needed a tracking system. And so I created a spreadsheet. It's very simple. It has a front statistics page. And we use the same spreadsheet format, not only for FYI, but for all our referral programs. So whether you're project-based or FYI mainstream, any voucher program that we may have received a referral for, emergency housing vouchers, they all have this exact same format. So it's very consistent for our service providers in our community that they can go in and see right away, this is how many referrals we currently have that haven't turned in an application and we're waiting on. This is how many applications we have in process. We've issued this many vouchers and what we've leased. And so it makes it very simple that anybody can go in and see where are we at with any given time. So in the Housing Authority monitors the amount of vouchers we've issued, any that have withdrawn, any that are aging out, because we want to make sure, especially if someone's coming up to 25 and they have a request for tenancy approval submitted, that we get that process before they turn 25 and we lease them up. So that's why we track all of this data within these spreadsheets in our tab, so that it's very simple and we don't miss anybody. And so that's part of why we do it that way. And it's easy as a community resource to give a link to Box so that anybody can access what's going on with their particular client that they're working with.
Fantastic. And I'll just close by saying, I know you've heard us say in the past, don't use coordinated entry to administer vouchers. I still want to caution against that because Sacramento is, I think, the only community that has figured out how to do it. And I also want to clarify and recall that Stephanie said they have a separate process for youth with FYI vouchers, separate assessment, does not screen youth out of it. It's an understanding that there's categorical eligibility for this. It's different than other things coming through coordinated entry. So I want to, as you hear these words, like take it with that grain of salt. If you're gonna involve coordinated entry, call Sacramento and figure out how they did it. Because it's working for them, but it has not worked for other communities. So I want to, caution. But it's an amazing process, what you all are describing in terms of the transparency of it all and efficiency of it all. Thank you so much to all of you for, oops, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just want to comment 2 things that came up. Somebody asked the question, what happens when a referral is made from the COC that they didn't qualify? On our referral form that is through DocuSign, it's a power form, so that's why it auto rolls to the next person. Stephanie will mark no, they're not eligible. So everybody gets a copy that this youth wasn't eligible, and that's why they can go back in and do a referral to another program within the COC. So that's why we have it. So there's a safeguard. We're not processing everybody. We get a referral from the COC. It initiates from the COC, but it goes to Stephanie and then the Housing Authority and copied to the service provider. So everybody's well aware this youth was not eligible. So that was somebody asked that question, and I just wanted to comment. We're not processing every referral. We are going in and checking eligibility.
Thank you for that. We could do a whole nother webinar on that, I imagine. Thanks everyone for joining. I'll send out the recording and the slides later today and any links that we missed. And thanks everyone. Thanks to all our panelists and to everyone for attending. Have a great rest of your week.